Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Sarah Bean, FOSI's Director of Research and Programs, and today FOSI has released a new research report called Australian Children's and Parents' Perceptions of the Recent Social Media Ban. And this research was led by FOSI's Alana Powers O'Brien and conducted with Ipsos, and you can find it on our website, fosi.org, or using the QR code that you see on screen. Next slide, please. So this research is part of FOSI's ongoing online safety survey, and it follows up on pre-ban data that FOSI published in December. So this survey is particularly relevant to the conversations we've been having today, as FOSI sought the perspectives of Australian young people ages 10 through 17 and Australian parents of young people in that same age group at two critical junctures. So October 2025, just before Australia's social media ban took effect, and in March and April 2026, around 4 months into this new policy. So as has been said today, this is still very early days for this policy, and FOSI is just one of many entities that are looking closely at how it's being implemented and its impacts. Next slide, please. So here are a few findings from this survey. So Australian parents' support for the ban has stayed high, with about 2/3 of Australian parents in support. And half of surveyed children have retained access to either some or all of their impacted social media accounts. And we found that just 19% lost access to all of their accounts. And other researchers, including from the Molly Rose Foundation, have also found that large numbers of children have retained access to their banned social media accounts. So from pre-ban to post-ban, children's support for the ban has increased from 38% to 43%, which is a significant increase. But that still means that less than half of children support this ban. And before the ban, just 1/3 of children thought that it might protect children's mental health. And post-ban, that number has increased to 58%. And parents' confidence in this also increased from 42% to 62%. But fewer parents and children think that the ban has decreased children's screen time. So before the ban, just under half thought that a social media ban would decrease children's screen time. And now those figures have dropped. So just 1/3 of parents and 37% of children say the ban has decreased children's screen time. Concerns about loss of connection and support have also decreased. So before the ban, more than half of children worried that they would lose important connections or support that they couldn't get elsewhere. So after the ban, that figure has dropped to 39%. And an area where we see consistent support from both children and parents, pre and post-ban, is their agreement with the statement, social media companies should create special accounts with additional protections for teenagers. So we see about 3/4 of parents and children who agree with this statement. So what do we make of this data? So again, keeping in mind, this policy has only been in place for a few months. And the fact that half of teens have retained access to banned accounts may help explain why relatively few parents or children think that the ban has reduced screen time, as well as their reduced concern about the loss of connections and support. It might also explain children's increased support for the ban because many of them haven't really been impacted yet. And yet we have this striking increase in parents and children's agreement that the ban is helping protect the mental health and well-being of children under 16. And finally, parents and children's consistent support for accounts designed for teens tells us that tech companies have a role to play here. It shows that even with a ban, and even with increased confidence that that ban is supporting mental health, Australian children and parents are still looking for ways to be safer online. The ban hasn't solved families' concerns about online safety. So researchers around the world are looking closely at what's happening in Australia, as well as other research about children's well-being, in hopes of keeping more kids safe online. And today I am very happy to welcome a panel of experts for a discussion of the latest research on children's digital well-being and an exploration of how technology policies are impacting children's rights. And in keeping of our theme of finding common ground, this panel features not just researchers, but representatives of civil society, industry, and a regulator. And our question today is not necessarily whether to ban or not to ban social media, but how research can and should inform policy and practice. So please join me in welcoming our panel to the stage. All right. So first, I'd like to go down the line and ask each of you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about where you work and what you do. And we'll start with Mike.
Mike Jackson, Head of AI Governance and Legal at Microsoft. I also lead digital safety at Microsoft.
Okay, hello. I'm not sure if, yes, it's working. I am Seaneen Sloan, and I am an associate professor in the School of Education at UCD. And one of my main roles there is to lead a research project called Growing Up in Digital Europe.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maxime Bourgeois, and I'm a cognitive science researcher at everyoneAI. So just quickly, everyoneAI is a non-profit organization that try to anticipate, educate, and raise awareness regarding the risk and opportunities of AI for children, adolescents, and young adults.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see lots of friends, colleagues, agitators from the space with us this afternoon. But I'm Jeffrey DeMarco. I'm a forensic psychologist, but at the moment I lead what's called the Safer Digital Childhoods Task Team at Save the Children, where we kind of try and do work across the 120 countries that we work in around digital well-being and online safety.
Finally, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen McAuley. I'm a Director of Policy with responsibility for children and vulnerable adults with Coimisiún, Meán, which is Ireland's independent agency for developing and regulating a diverse, thriving, creative, trusted and safe media landscape. And in brief, our responsibility in an Irish context and in collaboration with colleagues across Europe and globally is around supervising and enforcing online safety regulation.
Great, thank you all. So Maxime, I'm going to start with you. With the emergence of AI, adults around the world are looking at social media and saying, we don't want to miss an opportunity to build in safety by design like we kind of did with social media. So what does it mean to pursue AI development in ways that are ethical for young people? And are there big lessons about social media that policymakers and technology companies should be considering as we look to AI that can support young people?
So thank you for the question. I think what it's important to understand is for the moment, AI systems are already part of adolescents' lives. I think the last results is showing it in all countries. And AI systems are being deployed faster than developmental science can produce in terms of long-term evidence. And so we are back in the situation that what happened with social media several years ago. So we are facing what Yoshua Bengio called the evidence dilemma. So AI is becoming more capable, but evidence on their risk is slow to emerge and also really hard to assess. So that leads us in that situation where policymakers are in between two situations. Either they take measures right now that might be ineffective because we don't have the results, or they might wait for evidences and leave the society facing societal arms. So that's a tricky situation. I don't have the answer, to be honest, and I think it's the same situation as with social media. The advantage we have today, I think, with in comparison with social media is thanks to what happened with social media, we created research infrastructure, policy infrastructures that we can use now to anticipate the risk with AI. So basically, to come back to your questions regarding the lessons that we can take from social media, it's like, first of all, I think we already commented quite a lot. It's the question of the accountability. I mean, so far we left the accountability to the users and to the publishers of content due to the 230 section of the Communication Act. And now it's changing. We see that with the Meta litigations, and we saw that we can't leave the profit-seeking companies deciding on what are the safeguards. So that's why we need government with researchers, with regulators to set the standards, create like certification, oversight, and liability where design choices cause foreseeable harm. I think then the second lesson I would say is, we already talked also about it, but because we are doing also some advising for big tech companies, safety by design. It means like you start, and I think that Tandy said it, and I think it's quite right. You treat the most vulnerable population as the default setting, and then you try to design from there. And also, like, I'm not a huge fan of like leaving the safety in the hands of the parents, because then it creates pressure on them, responsibility and tension with young children. And that's what we don't want to break. One more thing is like we should include young people in the loop. I think like the example of this morning was a great example. They are not there anymore, but it was a really, really strong moment we all felt. And we need to include them within the loop. And that's really important. Like from the beginning, this is something we can change in comparison with social media. And to conclude, I think we need to educate. And that's it. I think that also applies to social media. It's AI literacy should be taught within schools from now and embedded within like a digital literacy policy, a strong digital literacy policy. To educate children, to make them understand how AI works, to make them able to criticize also the tools, and to not leave them as being passive users.
Thank you. So building on that idea of designing for the most vulnerable, Jeffrey, I want to go to you next. So Save the Children and Vodafone Foundation have worked together on research to measure children's digital well-being across Europe. And I believe in the research report that came out earlier this year, the headline was that they are surviving but not thriving in their digital lives. So could you tell us more about this research and what you would want parents and policymakers to know?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for the question. And yes, for those of you that know, we've had a fantastic kind of year-long relationship doing advocacy work, research, content and training with the Vodafone Foundation across 9 countries through their Skills Upload Junior program. And it's just been fantastic. They've been courageous. They've been brave. They've let me challenge them. They've challenged me back, which is what we want to achieve that common ground. And when it came to the research and the idea about the research, what we didn't want to do was to recreate the moral panics or the harm narratives around what's happening to young people online. I don't think anybody in this room disagrees that bad things happen to young people online. They do. We know that. We do have more work to do. But with our Save the Children hat on, and through the partnership, we have this desire to focus a little bit more on skills acquisition, competencies, and how we can really allow young people to thrive in those online spaces. So we developed a framework called the SMILE framework. So SMILE, that stands for data security, data management, digital identity, digital literacy, digital empathy. And the idea with the SMILE framework was that if we could assess these young people across Europe on these competencies, on these skills, can that give us an indication by proxy of their well-being? And so we then explored whether or not higher scores across the SMILE framework were able to then be useful in predicting well-being, which we found was not quite the case. They might actually be gaining that knowledge, gaining that awareness. But again, I think something everybody in this room will agree with is often the content, often the education, often the digital and media literacy work that we're doing is fantastic. It's great. It takes all of us to do so much work. It doesn't necessarily keep pace with that evolving technological landscape. So we need to go back to basics to an extent, I think, is what we're trying to do with the partnership. It's not trying to pretend that harm's not going to happen, but it is trying to create some tension and friction amongst the young people themselves. It's trying to encourage better conversation pieces with parents and carers in that space, and to ensure that the young people are participating and engaging. Kind of, as you were saying, they need to be in there from the beginning to tell us what they are worried about. The research equally told us, yes, we know that child sexual abuse and exploitation is a concern online, but as a majority, that is not what our primary concern is. There were other things such as their data footprints. There were things around kind of sadistic exploitative networks. There were issues around how they can critically think when they're engaging with influencers and the content they're engaging with. So that's ultimately how we've pivoted. And Sarah, I suppose kind of the last bit of your question is, what is the key message for parents and the key message for policymakers? Well, for the parents and the carers out there, it's trying to make sure that the messaging gets across that they don't need to have all the answers and they don't need to know how every single gaming platform, messaging app works. But they do need to have an awareness and something that can at least create conversation breakers to be involved, to be included, to communicate, to build, and to co-produce with their children. I've sat in a lot of sessions where I hear lots of kind of, mums and dads saying things like, they're fine, they're just up in their bedroom online, right? Or they also will say things kind of like, he likes that coding stuff, or she likes doing all that programming. He doesn't want to play football, she doesn't want to go to this. It's like, no, this is a great opportunity actually to kind of learn and explore something together. So it's to the parents and the carers, don't be terrified and don't think you need to know everything. For the policymakers, and keeping it grounded with a little bit of the conversation and the theme today around finding common ground, around kind of social media bans and alternatives and whatnot, it's that whatever we do, we need to include children in these consultations and in these kind of pieces of policy. We need to be talking to them in not a tokenistic way, so having their participation and meaningful inclusion. But we also need to be building in the data capture for whether these kind of policy decisions work. So I applaud eSafety, for example, in that they ensured that there was funding ring-fenced to evaluate the medium and long-term impacts and outcomes of what's going on in Australia. And I would say for policymakers, it's the same thing. It needs to be done and not just on a dime string.
Great. So thinking about that larger context that young people are in with their digital lives, I think that's a great segue to talk to you, Seaneen. So if you could tell us a little bit about your research and the Growing Up in Digital Europe study, and what this study is going to reveal about young people in countries across Europe.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sarah, for that question. So I'll just start by explaining a little bit about what Growing Up in Digital Europe is. It's a developing research infrastructure which will coordinate the collection of data from children and young people over the next 2 decades, cross-nationally with as many European countries as we can get funded to participate. We currently have a network of about 25 European countries, and Australia joined us recently as part of our last European Commission funded project, and over 100 researchers as part of our consortium. And it's coordinated by UCD, University College Dublin, where I'm based, along with Manchester Metropolitan University, and has actually been in development for about 10 years. And that has been supported to date by the European Commission through successive research grants. We're going to begin collecting data in 2028 with nationally representative samples of 8-year-old children and their parents through an online survey. In some countries, the data collection will also be face-to-face. And then that cohort of children will be followed up every 2 to 3 years until they reach their early 20s. And this design, this research infrastructure design, is modelled on and inspired by a number of similar studies that have been that are being conducted with adults to find out about their lives and to help inform and shape policy making to improve the lives of adults and older adults. So some of you may or may not have heard of the Survey of Health, Ageing and Retirement in Europe, SHARE. We're modelling our practice on their groundbreaking evidence that's been generated about adults' lives. because there's a major gap in that there's no infrastructure like this that is doing something similar but focused on children and prioritising children's perspectives, which seems like a major omission in terms of evidence-informed policy making. So what we're going to be doing is designing these surveys and administering them with the same sample that we'll follow up over time. And a real core focus of that survey is asking children to tell us about their well-being using validated measures of children's well-being, and then also collecting data on all the other aspects of their lives that we are able to reliably capture. So their experiences in education, of their social lives, of their home life, of family relationships, of peer relationships, what they do online, and that will be of major interest to the audience here. So this will help us understand how children's online and digital experiences are interacting with the wider contexts that they grew up in over time, and how that interacts with all sorts of other outcomes, including, really importantly, their well-being. And we do see digital well-being as being a really important aspect of children's overall well-being. And as we heard earlier today, children's digital lives are really interwoven within their everyday lives. It's different from when I was growing up, from when my parents were growing up. The digital aspects of life are just integral now, impacting on recreation, civic participation, educational opportunities and experiences, their social interactions, identity, all of that. And hopefully Guide will provide a really robust evidence base to help us understand more about what children's lives are like. We are developing our questionnaires with children's advisory groups. The 10 years of development that has underpinned Guide has been a partnership between children, politicians and scientists. So we feel that's a really robust foundation, and once we begin collecting our data, that data will be made open access and available to researchers and policymakers to use to answer questions that are most pertinent to them.
It's a great example of finding common ground. So when will the first data be available?
So there's an awful lot of work that will happen to collect the data and then to integrate it all together. So we'll have a child questionnaire and a parent questionnaire. They will have to be linked, they'll have to be processed, and before any data is released for secondary analysis, it has to be very carefully anonymised. So we would anticipate doing probably almost a year of work in terms of data preparation, and then be able to provide headline findings, and after that then secondary data sets available for researchers to analyse.
Great. I wish it was today.
Me too.
So, Karen, turning to you. So, with all this valuable data that's out there, could you tell us more about CNAM's role as a regulator, the approach that you take to regulation, and how do you use research? How does that inform, CNAM's approach to regulating for children's online safety?
Great. Thanks very much, Sarah, for that question. So briefly, and there's a lot we could say about our work as a regulator, but maybe just to mention, for those who may not be familiar with it, our online safety framework is really the bedrock of our work in relation to regulation of online safety, and that comprises the Digital Services Act and the Terrorist Content Online Regulation, both of which were obviously discussed and referenced this morning in different ways, but also our Online Safety and Media Regulation Act, which is the basis for our Online Safety Code. I know that's a lot of words, but basically it's three parts of a stool that guide our work as a regulator. In terms of our approach to regulation, I might just highlight a number of key elements to that approach. The first is that it's a rights-based approach, and what we mean by a rights-based approach is that we appreciate the need for regulation, but also the need to ensure that human rights and children's rights are upheld. So it's about balancing the need for rules and guardrails in a way that upholds human rights and children's rights. But also, in addition to that, it's about taking a holistic view of children's rights so that we're not disproportionately focusing in on one or more rights. We're looking at children's rights in the round. A second part of our approach is that we take a risk-based approach to regulation, and that's really about us as a regulator in the context of our supervision and enforcement work, thinking about what are the key risks and what are the most likely high impacts that we can have, so that we're directing our energies and resources effectively and appropriately. A third part is that we are supervision-led in our approach to regulation, and that really involves ongoing regulatory dialogue with the entities, the different digital services that we regulate, whether they be video sharing platform services that we regulate under our online safety code, or broader online platforms that are accessible, in the case of children, accessible to children. Three more pieces to this. Another piece I know was mentioned earlier today by Jeremy, by Bernardo, is the importance as regulators that we work together. It's a cliche, I know, but the internet knows no borders, so it's really important that we work as a network and that we communicate, we collaborate, we coordinate as much as possible in the interests of providing for a consistent approach, while also acknowledging and recognising national differences as regulators. So a lot of these networks were mentioned earlier today, but Coimisiún Meán is part of the European Board of Digital Services. We are part of and currently chair the Global Online Safety Regulators Network, which I know FOSI is part of as an observer. So that piece is really, really important in terms of endeavouring to provide consistency and coordinated approach to regulation globally. And then two other pieces. We also are outcome focused in our outlook. I know a number of others have mentioned today other regulators about not being about being tech neutral. So we take very much an outcome based approach. And in respect of children, the outcome we're working towards is a media landscape, including an online media landscape where children's rights are upheld together with their development and well-being and their safe engagement with content. And then finally, and crucially, coming to evidence, it's a critical part of our approach to regulation. We're mandated by law to take an evidence-based approach to decision-making. And I might just kind of explain that a little bit more with reference to one example, so it's a bit more concrete. So I mentioned we have our online safety code. That code has been fully in operation since July of last year, and it applies to 9 video sharing platform services that are based in Ireland. And in the context of developing that code, we took, I suppose there were a number of work streams involved. The first is that we commissioned a meta-study to try and understand the range, the evidence base in terms of harm, including in respect of children. And that meta-study looked at evidence at national level in Ireland, across Europe and globally, with a view to providing us with an objective baseline to inform the development of the rules that come under the scope of the code. In addition to that, we held 2 rounds of public consultation, formal consultation, which gave us an opportunity to hear from a range of different stakeholders. So from civil society organisations, from professional academics and research institutions, from industry, and from concerned citizens as well, about what they felt the code should contain and what kind of approach we should take to regulating under the code. And then a third stream that supported the development of that work was our engagement with our Youth Advisory Committee, which is a statutory committee which we established in 2023, and which, in respect of the code, but also subsequently, has been a really valuable opportunity for us to hear directly from organisations that work with and on behalf of young people, but also from young people themselves, about the direction of travel they think we should be taking as a regulator. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is evidence takes different forms, but it's a really critical part of our approach to regulation.
That's great. Thank you for that. So speaking of digital services, turning to you, Mike. Microsoft, young people encounter it everywhere. Software they use, Xbox, lots of different platforms. So, and Microsoft has been around for a long time. So, what has Microsoft learned about supporting online safety and the role of industry in finding that common ground with researchers and policymakers?
Thanks, Sarah. So I think for us, and there's really 4 efforts that I'll highlight. We started many years ago, just with the conversations that we've had with civil society, with researchers, with regulators, really looking at where things were going. And so I'll maybe start first with our AI services. About 5 or 6 years ago, based on conversations that we were having, both with AI labs, with civil society members, with some of our own internal research teams, we embarked on this journey to create what we call internally our responsible AI standard, which really creates a framework for our internal teams that are developing solutions, creates guardrails and what they can and can't do with products, when are reviews required, and then building on that within the last 6 months, we've developed internally a process we refer to as our sensitive interactions process, which is for teams that are working specifically on AI chatbot solutions or companion products. What are the things that they need to consider when designing those products? When do crisis protocols get triggered? When do we refer individuals to organizations that can help? When do we shut down conversations and not engage further, right? Because we don't want to exacerbate a dialogue that's happening. It's very extensive. In addition to that, one of the things that we've worked externally to do, really working closely and picking up on the thread from today with capturing youth's voices, is working with what we call our AI Futures Youth Council. So it's a group of global students and individuals that we work with to get their theme and get their signal on what's important as they're interacting with AI experiences. And then within the last, I would say 6 months, we commissioned research. So we worked closely with about 131 students from India and Singapore to really get signal from them on what is important as they're interacting with AI and having digital and online experiences. And several of the themes I think have already come through in today's conversation, but 2 that I'll highlight that were particularly interesting to us and I think have signaled a need for further investment in spaces. So the first was a signal that we got from these students was oftentimes they turn to AI or they interact with particular experiences because they feel like it's a non-judgmental space, right? And so for us, one of the things that signal internally is that it means we really need to think about both in the classroom setting, in the online setting, as we're rolling out experiences, what's the education that we're providing? What are the resources that we're providing if someone is in a crisis moment? And for educators, what are the resources that we can provide that help them spot someone that perhaps is having a crisis moment? And then the second finding, which was also really interesting, and I think pulled through on the thread and the conversation that Eric led, which is there was an awareness of online harms, but to varying degrees, right? And so again, that highlighted the need for us for education and thinking about how we appropriately, by design, build in some safeguards.
Great, thank you. So staying on that AI theme for a moment, Maxime, I want to come back to you. So, your research has focused on, ethical AI for young people, and you published a very significant report earlier this year. Could you tell us a little bit about some of your most important findings?
Okay, so I will maybe first talk about our coalition. So everyoneAI, we are part of an international coalition that is called iRaise, that we co-created with the Paris Peace Forum. And basically this coalition gathers researchers, but also non-profit organizations, big tech companies such as Microsoft or OpenAI, Google, youth voices, and governments. I don't know if I say it because AI cases or use cases are so large, and this is what we are saying. It's like we can, research without consequences is a bit useless. So we need policymakers, regulators, and on the other hand, policymakers taking decisions without research, it's a bit. So we need everyone in the loop, and also big tech companies that are doing some effort to improve their tools. And so thanks to this coalition, we came up with a report that is called and Adolescence and Anthropomorphic AI. So we decided to focus our research on adolescence because we know it's a specific period of life where we are more sensitive to social feedback, approval, belonging, relational signals. And while we are still developing our long-term judgment, self-regulation, or impulse control, and it's also an important period of our life when we will set our values, sense of autonomy and identity. So that's why we decided to focus on that period of life. And we know that because of this anxiety, social anxiety, uncertainty at this period of life, we have this tendency to anthropomorphize a bit more. So to anthropomorphize, it means to attribute human traits such as belief, intention, desires to non-human entities. And conversational AI can really trigger that because they speak our language, they respond they react on real-time basis, and so we don't want adolescents to over-rely on these tools. We want them to use it, of course, but not to over-rely on it. And so basically, we came with 2 findings. So the first one is like, of course, there was a high consensus. So this is a link to what I was saying. We don't want to wait for all the evidences to come to take measures. So to try to anticipate that, we were okay. We have a lot of experts around the table. What is the consensus? So basically the consensus are some shouldn't guardrails. I won't name all of it, so please read the report if you want to see all of them. But basically it's like AI shouldn't pretend to be a human, AI shouldn't promote over-reliance and exclusivity, or AI shouldn't be hyper-agreeable, which reduces like self-reflection, etc., etc. And then there's that second part, which was very interesting. It's like, okay, we were agreeing on some principles, but there is that gray area. It's like, where do you draw the limit? And we identified basically 16 cues that can trigger socio-affective reliance with children and especially adolescents. So basically these cues are, for example, emotional state of expression, empathy, human markers of communications. And basically from that now we are building a benchmark that will be released. Maybe the beta version will be presented next week at the VivaTech conference. So we are quite proud about it. And so basically the benchmark will assess, of course, the content provided by the model, but we'll also assess what is the type of response they are giving on these 16 cues and the level of presence they are giving. So I'm going to take an example. It's like, for example, you were talking about a crisis situation. So depending on the context, of course, you don't want the same level of presence. So an example is like, an adolescent looking for emotional support that is going to say, okay, I hate my life. It's so hard to be an adolescent. I want to kill myself. Okay. In that case, we are going to rate these cues and say, okay, do you want AI to have empathy on the answer it's going to provide? So either it's level 1, it's like 0 level of presence. It's like, I'm an AI, I can't help you. You should talk to someone. And level 5 of presence would be, I completely get you, adolescent sex, but you should contact someone. And we can see that the impact is not the same. And so basically our benchmark, like that's the result we got. It's like we have these 16 cues and we are asking experts to rate what would be the optimal answer based on these 16 cues and what are the thresholds we don't want the AI to cross over.
Fascinating. So, and I loved the way you described the coalition of all the people that are working on this very important and complex problem, which brings me back to you, Seaneen, with researchers all across Europe in many different countries with different funders all working on this study. How do you stay coordinated and how do you make sure that the research that you're doing effectively informs policy across Europe, not just in one place?
Really excellent questions. So how we stay coordinated, I mean, I could bore everyone to death with some of our, I guess, standard operating procedures around, the different meetings we have. We have scientific groups, we have consortium meetings, we have management meetings, we have national meetings, we have meetings with funders, with survey agencies. So we spend a lot of time in meetings, unfortunately, because then no other work gets done. But apart from that, we have been developing over the last 4 years in line with procedures to establish as a legal entity called an ERIC, or European Research Infrastructure Consortium, which involves a huge governance aspect. So we've been developing lots of protocols in order to operate as an organisation, which helps us in terms of the coordination. The countries involved will all need to be on the same page and doing the same thing, because that's the selling point of our study, as opposed to all these countries doing their own thing. We want to generate a comparative data set, and that brings me to your second point about policy. So one of the benefits of our study is that we will be collecting data at the same time in lots of different countries using similar methods, a standardised questionnaire that the countries have developed and agreed upon together that reflects some of their own national priorities and may include additional optional modules for their country where there are particular aspects that they want to focus on, and using standardised fieldwork procedures. And we know that lots of countries already have their own national cohort studies, but this one will be harmonised, and that will give us better comparable data so that we can look at the different countries and understand children's lives and experiences within those different countries, where there are very different policy environments, policy contexts, where there may be policies at very different stages of implementation. And what does that mean then for children's outcomes is what our data sets will be able to answer. So we're very interested through our data in understanding which children are thriving, under which conditions, and in what domains of well-being. Well-being is something that's very multidimensional. What influences how and why children are thriving, and what policies are needed in order to ensure children have the best outcomes. And just reflecting on some of what I learned today, which has been absolutely fascinating, the fact that our study is beginning with a cohort age 8 at sort of that middle childhood age, whenever they're maybe starting to dip their toe in the online spaces and maybe doing a lot more independently, maybe without supervision or monitoring. And just, you know, a data set like ours hopefully will be able to keep pace with all of these, the developments that are happening so rapidly, but it'll be really important for us to do that in close collaboration with children, with policymakers, so we make sure that our data is going to be responsive to the needs of researchers and policymakers. But I think one thing that has struck me is how we need to be able to capture, I suppose, children's, not just what children are doing online, but maybe the impact that it is having on them, how maybe it is shaping their views, how they see themselves, how they see other people, how they treat other people, because all of that will impact on children's well-being. So, yeah, I think taken away from today for me, or a massive takeaway, I guess, is just how important those conversations with young people and with policymakers are, with research teams as well. So I would just invite anybody that wants to get in touch to share any of their experiences or help our questionnaire development teams to develop the best questionnaires possible so that the data is there for you in the future to use, to analyse in whatever way you want to, in order to answer really important questions that we've all been discussing today.
What a great invitation. So we're starting to run a little low on time, but Jeffrey, I want to come back to you. So, you know, civil society organizations, NGOs, often play that kind of linking role in helping with policy and research and practitioners. And, you know, Save the Children works all across the world in many different contexts, including some that are, you know, where children are in immediate, you know, bodily danger. So, you know, could you contextualize us a bit about why Save the Children also has this focus on digital harm, which is where your work is, and, you know, given some of the dire situations around the world, why you still see this as a critical piece of your work?
Thanks, Sarah. That's a really important question. And I think I like to frame it within, we'll come back to the online safety space ever so briefly, in that often within that wider kind of international NGO sector, online safety is often seen as secondary or not as significant as a harm as things like hunger, war, environmental disasters, humanitarian crises. But we look at it from a different perspective. It's not, as many of this room will agree, it's not about young people being online and offline. That is their lived reality. They are engaged, they are communicating, they are socializing, they are having developmental experiences whilst they are on apps, on platforms. So that's part of their identity formation. It's part of their normative psychological development, cognitive development. It's part of their evolving capacities. And then the second bit that we like to look at is this isn't a bolt-on for what the work we're doing and lots of the programming and advocacy kind of direction we're taking it on. So for a young person that might be displaced due to conflict, right, that phone or that tablet might be their only way to connect with their loved ones and family elsewhere. It might be their only way to seek support. It might be their only way to continue learning in an emergency. If there's a humanitarian crisis or environmental disaster, their phone, their tablets, the technology can give them early warnings. It can give them knowledge and awareness material around how to prepare and what that looks like. For a young person that lives in an unsafe home or community, this is about connection. This is about identity formation. This isn't us dismissing the risks that go along with everything. And some fantastic work just a few weeks ago by the Online Safety Act Network in the UK developed a code of practice for safety by design, right? And they're fantastic principles to follow, whether it is around an online safety regime or whether it is about a young person that's fleeing a war-torn or war-ravaged country. So for us, it's not a bolt-on. It's about their lived reality. It's about their experience. It's about parenting. It's about education. And with, if we risk these dialogues with the programming we do, with the advocacy work we do of to ban or not to ban, good or bad, risk or opportunity, if we take one stance or the other, there is the possibility that, if we go hard on the risk, well, we're taking away all of these opportunities for connection, for learning, for innovation. If we go just for the opportunities, as I mentioned kind of in my opening bit, no one's disputing that bad things happen in online spaces. We know they do, and we need to keep doing work. And I know I'm speaking to the converted in this room, but enormous credit to kind of Stephen and the whole FOSI team for bringing us together across regulators, across researchers, civil society, government, because it's really, really important that we de-silify all of that we do not talk about this with my little NGO hat on or with, your tech hat on or whatever kind of angle you take it from. We can learn from each other, and that is what we're doing. The needs for my young people in terms of online safety in high-income countries is very different than some of the concerns on the ground in low- and middle-income countries. And as you say, very different risks, but with that we see opportunity for safety, for support, and scaffolding around that.
Great, thank you. Karen, I want to come back to you just really quickly in 30 seconds. If you could tell us, what kinds of evidence are most valuable to you as working in a regulatory environment?
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and I promise I will keep this very short. I can see a clock going down here. So I mentioned a number of types of evidence. I think the very short answer to your question is there's no single one type of evidence that's more useful than another. It's a combination of different types of evidence and different types of sources so that you're building up a picture insofar as possible in real time as to what's happening, and that's informing our thinking and decision making. I mentioned our engagement with our Youth Advisory Committee. I mentioned meta-studies and meta-analysis, and I mentioned stakeholder engagement through public consultation. In addition to those types of evidence, large-scale longitudinal studies like the one Seaneen is talking about. Also, we're leading out on the EU Kids Online research in Ireland, so that would be another example. Findings of that will come out next year. Different types of literature reviews are very important to us. I won't go into the detail because I know there isn't time. Complaints and concerns that are brought to us by members of the public, by civil society organisations, and also by our fellow digital services coordinators are also very important pieces of evidence that have informed or helped to inform decisions we've made to initiate a number of recent investigations. And then in addition to that, there's the platform risk assessments and transparency reports, market monitoring that we undertake in the context of supervision, and a number of other pieces as well. I'd just say, we have a dedicated research team, and in addition to that, we are looking to build our capacity in terms of, for example, technical insights, data forensics. So it's something that we're very committed to, is having that capacity to take an evidence-based approach.
Great. So we're running low on time. So I have one more question for each of you. Lightning round here. So I'll start with you, Mike. What do you think are the most important research or data needs in the year ahead to support children's digital safety? And it could be about AI, it could be about something else.
So there are three from my perspective. So the first is continuing to look at harm measurement. I think that's absolutely critical. And so there's work that a lot of organizations are doing and folks represented on this panel. And I think continuing those dialogues is absolutely critical and making sure that we're staying ahead of where harm and risk is going. The second, I think specific to AI, is continuing to look at and make sure that we have the right evaluations in place, like when we are looking at potential harms. And then the third, I would say from a research perspective, is really continuing to look at where we find examples of things done really well to mitigate particular risk, how we highlight those in the form of case studies, how we bring those forward. I think all three of those are critical from my perspective.
Go ahead.
Wow. It's hard to know where to start with that, and especially in designing a questionnaire where we're trying to capture everything about all aspects of children's lives. I honestly am saying I don't know how to answer that.
You could say everything. That's okay.
Everything. I feel like it's a researcher's dilemma in that our questionnaires end up being far too long. So I think what we're focusing on is, say, for children at the age of 8, trying to develop questions that are going to be developmentally appropriate and capture what their main concerns are and needs are at that moment in time. But thankfully, we will be going back to those young people at age 11 and then every 2 years after that point. So we will be continually developing our questionnaires in response to what we see and hear and learn from yourselves as being the needs, the data needs. So we don't just have this one-shot opportunity to collect our data. It will be an ongoing process. So,
love it. Maxime?
Maybe two things. I think because it takes time to get evidences to start building research right now, longitudinal research with really randomized control trials. So that's a bit technical, but maybe what is happening in Estonia is quite interesting. We could compare a group that is having an AI tutor in comparison with, of course, I'm sure they are already doing it, but so that's the way we should continue. It's compare what is happening when people are using, I'm talking about AI, but that could be with any other things. And I think another thing that is quite interesting, I think we should measure digital literacy and AI literacy, and there is the PISA evaluation report that will be put in place, I think, in 2029, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a really exciting thing. We know the PISA report that it has a huge influence on the ranking of universities, and so soon they will be addressing this digital literacy measure, and I think that's a great step.
Great, and I second the need for high-quality outcomes evaluation. Jeffrey?
I'll be quick. 3 things, 2 have already been touched upon. Longitudinal research, and we're hearing good stuff about that. It's important to understand. But longitudinal research that is agile and is dynamic, because as we know, children's lives are ever so changing, and so are the technological engagements that they're having. The second is around impact evaluation, especially, we are on this viral policymaking global kick right now, and it would be really, really helpful if we make sure that we're putting the money in ahead of time. And impact evaluations cost a lot of money, though. So I think that's a plea to kind of those commissioning this research. It's not 60K. It needs to be ring-fenced, appropriate funds that set up these robust, rigorous evaluations. And last but not least, more research with the children who aren't in the research. So children in humanitarian settings and their online safety. Big one for us right now is children with disabilities. With the Vodafone work, we did try and capture that, and we're working on some additional outputs on the back of that. It's a starter, but we want more of that.
Karen?
Okay, very briefly as well. 2 things I might pick up on, primarily actually with reference to a previous role that I held for many years in relation to children's rights. The first, in Meán, I think it's going back to something you were saying this morning. You made a very eloquent case for why young people need to be heard and be at the centre of the conversations, including around any prospective social media age restrictions. I would go back to the idea that children have a right to be heard, and you have a right to be in the room and part of those conversations. And I think, notwithstanding the fact that that right has been in place for 40 years now, it's still not mainstreamed, so we need to get to a point in terms of research where the voices, views, experiences of children are mainstreamed in terms of the types of research that we undertake and the assessments that we make. The second piece I might add just briefly is, I'm thinking of the Article 28 guidelines under the DSA, which came into effect last July, and risk review is a part of those guidelines. And one of the things that the guidelines encourage on the part of online platforms accessible to children is that they conduct child rights impact assessments. So I think there's again loads of scope in terms of research and capacity building I say on an ecosystem level, to integrate and mainstream child rights impact assessment into the work.
Great. Do we have time for like one question? One or two? Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? We have one right here. Do we have?
So I have a question, sorry, Kate from Vodafone, just around kind of the theme and common ground and adjacent discussions. We've heard a lot around from policymakers, people from tech industry, the young people themselves, but also really conscious that bad actors are actually exploiting systems more. So we're seeing, I've heard, that playbooks are being created to create CSAM. They're coming above the line. They're not afraid to have more forums. More money is high reward, low risk for exploitation of people. So just how does that all link together in terms of research and how, just getting more thoughts on that side?
Who wants to take that?
I'll kick off, but I'll take it from the positive lens and the positive angle. Not that you can really speak positively about these horrific harms, but it's again, grounding ourselves with knowing that we need to understand what are these skills and competencies that young people need as they develop, as they mature. And that's not putting the responsibility on them. So for anybody that thinks that's what I'm saying, like, let the kids sort it out themselves. No, I'm not implying that whatsoever, but I am talking about the reality of their engagements. And therefore, what are the things, what elements of critical thinking, what's helping build their digital resilience, right? And not treating resilience as an afterthought when something bad happens, which I'm sure many people in this room have seen survivors, victims of horrific crimes talk, and often they're congratulated for being so resilient. Well, let's not look at it that way. Let's look at cultivating resilience, cultivating digital resilience with that skills acquisition so that there is a buffer, there is some protection, there is the creation of friction, tension, so that if something bad does happen, perhaps we're mitigating some of the harm that will occur.
Mike, do you want to have the last word on that?
Yeah, so maybe the one other thing I'll add is I think continued dialogue about some of these new and novel risks, right? So one of the conversations that I've been a part of lately is how you continue with things like CSAM to look at new and novel ways to detect or new and novel risk that continue to emerge in that space. And so there's a lot of conversation that we're having, I think, both cross-industry, cross-researchers that needs to continue. But the other thing that I would say is from a regulatory perspective to look at, and this to some extent, I think, it goes to the point that was just raised, which is looking at how we stay ahead of where things are going, right? And be dynamic both from a implementation perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective.
I have so enjoyed this conversation. Please join me in thanking our panel.